atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Northern Kentucky University political scientist Michael Baranowski. I'm joined today by not one, not two, but three co-hosts. Yes, it is a Mike, May, Trey, and Ken special post-election episode. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining me on this Wednesday afternoon. I'm sure it's been a busy day for all of you, like it has been for me, and I appreciate you taking the time. And we hope this is at least somewhat interesting to listeners. And I guess I wanted to start with a quote that occurred to me from the late, great H.L. Mencken, which is, "Democracy is the theory that the common people know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard." And, well, certainly the people have spoken, and we're getting another 4 years to Donald Trump good and hard, for better or for worse. We will find out before too long. There's another quote that also occurred to me from a guy named Dick Tuck, who most people would not know. He was a political operative in the 60s and 70s. And when he lost the race for the California State Senate in, I believe, the 60s, he said, "The people have spoken, the bastards." And Dick Tuck, wherever you are, I know how you feel at this point. So, and I was saying from the start, I thought we would probably have to wait a few days to see who won this election. But nope, it's Donald Trump's biggest win of his 3 presidential runs. He not only took, at least at this point, it looks like all 7 of the battleground states, assuming his leads in Nevada, Arizona, and Michigan hold up, but he won, it looks like, the national popular vote as well, something that a Republican has not done in 20 years. So yes, Donald Trump and MAGA is back, not just back, but you can argue stronger than ever, and he'll be returning to the presidency with a Republican-controlled Senate. Now it's just a question of the size of the majority, 53 or possibly even 54 seats, and quite possibly Republican control of the House as well, though that we will not know for at least probably, I'm guessing, a few more days. And we have, I am sure, a lot to say about the election returns. I will start since I'm already talking. I've said from the beginning that I felt like this was Donald Trump's race to lose, and that Kamala Harris wouldn't have been my second, third, or fourth choice, and that she was the worst Democratic candidate, not named Joe Biden. I tried to talk myself into some optimism toward the end, but honestly, I wasn't really feeling it. And in the end, my pessimistic forecast of Donald Trump winning with 312 electoral votes looks like it'll be the end result. So I wish I could say I was surprised. I'm not surprised. I'm a little surprised by the popular vote, but there you go. And so I'm going to turn this over to, let's start with you, Trey, your initial reactions on all of this.
I wasn't shocked. As for those of us who are supporters and you were on Discord, I was the one who was calling Pennsylvania for Donald Trump way back. And so I don't think this is a surprising result. And I think the thing that was surprising is the inroads that Trump land made into historically Democratic voting blocks. But it's not new. It's a pattern, right? So, I work with a number of research companies, and, Latinos, men, Black men, younger men, they all pulled towards Donald Trump. And while I don't always attest everything, I think Marco Rubio had it right last night when he was talking on ABC and NBC about the fact that Democrats are still stuck in demographics, and they don't realize it's actually about economics. And as a matter of fact, Ken, I was going to give you a little bit of a hard time too. Just a couple of weeks ago when we had our last show, we were talking about the union, and we were trying to decide, and I was a little flabbergasted by your response. I think our difference of opinion there demonstrates voters' difference of opinion. And then before that, I think a lot of the qualitative data pointed towards Donald Trump. We've had on the show the authors of Union Blues. And once again, the exit polls is showing that the union support is not there for Democrats the way that it once was, because economically speaking, depending on your income bracket, that's a huge predictor in this particular election. I'm still sifting through the data, but those are my early takeaways.
And we should point out that at this point, there's still a lot of data that has not come out, and it's actually going to be probably weeks, if not longer, before we get really good data on that. But I wanted to throw that in there. But Ken, I did want to talk to you because of all of our hosts, you are the one who seemed to be the least convinced that Donald Trump could return to the presidency. And yet here we are. So you had to be the most shocked of all of us, maybe the only one of us who was really shocked of all our hosts. What's your takeaway from this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was really shocked. You guys all have better crystal balls than I do, I guess, because I really did not believe that this was coming. And it really did happen, everywhere. That's one thing I started looking at is, a lot of people are focused on the battleground states and that they shifted towards Trump by 3 or 4 points, mostly since the 2020 election. But that was actually also true in the states that weren't the battleground states. So states like New York and New Jersey, which still, went overwhelmingly for Harris, they were still, Trump did 4 points better there than he did 4 years ago also. So it did seem to be a nationwide swing of about 4 points, which in almost every state, which I didn't see coming. I think, although in New York City, Harris got about 68% of the vote, but that means Trump did better than any Republican in about 90 years, with his 32% of the vote there. And so I don't know really, why that happened. I still tend to think, unlike Trey, that, it's really more about nativism than about economics. I think Biden was a great president for the economy, and Trump was not as good a president for the economy and will not be as good a president for the economy. And so I'm disappointed, but it happened.
Yeah, it certainly did. And May, I'm guessing you're the least surprised that it happened. And what's your initial take as to why it happened?
So I think Kamala Harris was not a good candidate. I think there's been a lot of finger pointing at various things, and I haven't seen as much of she wasn't a good candidate. She went on The View and said, I can't think of anything that I would do differently from Joe Biden.
Oh, yeah.
She had a good debate, but there was only one, and the debate mostly let Trump talk, and everybody's already heard Trump talk. I think at the end, people really didn't feel comfortable with her. And I know that economics is the big story. 2/3 of people in the exit polls said that they cared about economy, number one issue. 40+% of those people said that their economic position wasn't good. So it feels like it's an economic election. That said, I think the 2022 red wave that didn't happen should have been the economic election. The indicators were worse there. The inflation was at a higher rate. And yet there wasn't a red wave, and there was now. And I really do think that cultural issues were now much more on the ballot. Mostly my issue, which is you saw Kamala Harris on an advertisement every 3 seconds saying she wants transgender procedures for inmates. Same thing with Sherrod Brown refusing to support the Protect Women and Girls in Sports Act. Same thing with Colin Allred. So I think that those issues weren't like, oh, I'm voting because I'm concerned that a male is going to enter my locker room or my sport or whatever. But I think there was an effective branding of Democrats being the party of out-of-touch progressive elites, and that there was a working man's party. And I think that transgender issue helped make that concrete in a way that just talking about it, saying you're an elitist, really didn't. So I think there was a strong cultural element there that really, I would say, spoke to Latinos who are not woke people.
When I was teaching, I would sometimes talk with some of my colleagues, and they would say, oh, the kids, they're so dumb. I just gave an exam and most of them flunked it. And whenever I bring this up, because whenever that happened with me, especially if it happened maybe more than once, my initial thought was, maybe it's not the kids that are dumb. Maybe it's something I'm doing that's wrong. At least that was my assumption. And I feel like there are too many Democratic Party elites who are trying to convince themselves somehow that, well, no, it's that the electorate is wrong and we have to just remake the electorate, when I think what we really need to do is say, hey, we're we're 1 for 3 against Donald Trump and right-wing populism. And that one win came with a big assist from a pandemic. And so at this point, I'm hoping that this loss is big enough to get us to look in the mirror and say, what have we done that has made us lose those union voters, those Hispanic males, such big parts of what used to be the Democratic constituency? I don't think we're going to do that. I think we're going to say, well, it's because Kamala Harris is a black South Asian woman and there are just a bunch of evil racists in the Republican Party. It's absolutely the wrong message. But I fear that it's going to take a defeat a series of defeats on the level of what the Democrats faced in 1980, 1984, and 1988, like 400 plus electoral vote defeats to get them to recalibrate in a real way that brought us a more centrist Bill Clinton kind of guy who could be in touch with the electorate. I don't see that's going to happen. I sure hope it is because, wow, I feel like my party, especially my party's elites, have just done a dramatic disservice. Sorry, Ken, you might have a different view on that, but since you're the only other Democrat in the room here, I wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah, well, I guess one thing that I'd still want to see some data on, I don't think we have it yet, on this question of whether Harris was a bad candidate. One thing that'll be kind of telling is, we can find out in most of the states where there were Senate races, the Democratic Senate candidates did better than Harris. So a kind of simple read on that would be, well, she's a bad candidate because there were votes available to her from people who voted for Democratic Senate candidates but didn't vote for her, so she didn't get those votes. But what I'm actually wondering is, did those voters vote in the Senate race at all? Because I think the other hypothesis could be that, Trump was really reaching out a lot to low propensity voters who hadn't voted much in the past. He seems to have been somewhat successful at doing that. And maybe they just went in and voted for Trump and didn't vote in the Senate races at all. So I don't know if we really know yet, whether there were a lot of ticket splitters, which would imply that Harris was a bad candidate, or whether there weren't really a lot of ticket splitters, but there were a lot of people who only voted in the presidential race. So I would like to find that out. And I think that would give us a little bit of data towards making the assessment of, was it something about the candidate, and because I think in most states where the Democratic senators were running, they got between 4 and 7 points better than Harris did. At least in Wisconsin, we already know now that Baldwin hung on when, Harris didn't win. And so that's at least one where that point was outcome dispositive. On the other thing that you were talking about do they move to the left? Do they move to the center? I don't know the answer to that. I think the Republicans have mostly succeeded when they move further to the right, not when they move to the center. So I think, G.W. Bush was about as far to the right as anyone in his primary pool was. And then Trump certainly was. And when the Republicans ran more to the center with people like McCain and Romney, that's when they didn't win. So I wouldn't take it as obvious that the path to electoral success is running to the center. I just don't know. I think they need to do more study on that. But I think, sort of paradoxically, I think when you talk about the union voters leaving and going over to Trump, that may have been, not because those were kind of business as usual voters who wanted to a candidate running to the center, but more because they wanted someone who would really shake things up. And that could have been the far left or the far right. And since Trump was offering the far right, they went with that. So I think all those questions are still pretty open questions.
Yeah, I don't know that Trump is as far right on certain issues as he's being portrayed as being. To me, I guess there was a great comment from Republican pollster named Patrick Ruffini, and he made this last week, actually, before this all came down on X. He said, if you're non-ideological, non-political, hate Washington, hate politicians, and don't think the system works, what reasons is Kamala Harris giving you to vote for her? And I thought that's an excellent point, because I feel like I follow this stuff for a living, literally. And Harris's team, I think, never found a real message that wasn't kind of some variation of Trump is awful. I mean, I can tell you what Donald Trump is for and what he's against. But aside from Harris being against Donald Trump and being for people and good stuff in general, I think she was a bad candidate. We knew she was going to be a bad candidate, and she was hamstrung by being so closely tied to the Biden administration. This was just a perfect negative storm for the Democrats. But Trey, go ahead. I interrupted you. I want to just throw that in there.
No, it's all good. I think one thing we got to be careful about here, I mean, this is what we do with politics, guys. It is we are falling into the horse race narrative here, that it matters about the horse more than it matters about the structure. And I'm a political scientist. I can tell you right now that we can make pretty good predictions about who wins or loses without knowing the particular candidates. There's a phenomenal book called Do Campaigns Matter? It came out a number of years ago now, and it continues to get updated, which basically suggests that the kinds of basic framing that we're talking about here is not the primary reason people vote. So let's go back again to the data. Let's take a look at the economy. Voters in the exit polls, 67% say that it is in bad or terrible shape. 42% say that they are worse off than they were before. That is worse in terms of comeback, not since the 2008 recession era. And so you have, if you are the incumbent in that location, and because of the unusual nature of Harris taking over for Biden, she of course is going to inherit that incumbent status. I think back to when thinking about the particularistics of Harris as a candidate, I think overlooks the bigger, more important structural. And again, go take a look at Joe Biden's approval and disapproval rating. 58% where we're standing right now at a disapproval. So I get that we might need to think about some of those things, but we have to be careful. I just got to bring the poli side back to the politics guys and to remind us, you could have put another person there for Harris, and that person would be facing the same structural variables. And I'm going to bring up one other thing that we have not talked about, and it's a little uncomfortable, but it's true. The numbers to this, if we take a look at the difference from Harris to Biden, we look at key demographics among men, suggests to me that a lot of men still don't want to vote for a woman. And I know back when Hillary Clinton ran against Donald Trump, one of the takeaways was, well, it wasn't because Clinton is a woman, it's because she's a Clinton. But I think again, we need more data to come in, but the preliminary evidence suggests that when Donald Trump runs against a woman, he is getting a slight benefit due to some structural sexism.
May, you're one female here. What do you think about that whole Harris being a woman hurt her argument?
Well, and she's an incumbent. That's not just that.
No, but you mentioned the woman thing, so I just figured, we have one woman here with us who certainly would not have been a Harris voter either way, but I wanted to get May's thoughts on that. Go ahead.
I mean, I guess I just struggle with that. Everybody's different. Like, of course, there are people who will not vote for a woman, just like there are women who are tired of seeing a white man as a president. Like, I think that exists, but it's hard for me to explain the loss that way necessarily, because I guess I see other movements that are bigger, including the Latino shift. So Trump is up about what looks like maybe 8 percentage points with Hispanic women. So these are women who said no to a diverse female candidate in favor of somebody who wants mass deportations. And I like that's a much bigger swing than anything that happened with the male vote. I think just you guys have it probably, but I just don't think that is driving the narrative, even though for several people it was. Now, do women face issues that men don't? I think we do. I think that it's hard as a female candidate. If you're overprepared, you are scripted. If you're underprepared, you're stupid. It's hard to get the benefit of the doubt. And I do think that it is harder to run as a woman. And I don't think Kamala Harris had the political skills necessary in order to overcome that additional difficulty. And so I, part of it is that she's a woman, but I think at the end of the day, a Michelle Obama or somebody who is more politically skilled might have been a different story.
Yeah, and going back to Trey's talk about fundamentals, you could just look back and say, well, hey, the incumbent party has lost 4 out of the last 5 presidential elections, which kind of fits in with an angry anti-establishment electorate that doesn't trust any institutions in this sense. And so certainly I think candidates matter. I think a better candidate than Harris would have done, but I think a better candidate than Trump would have done better as well. So I think that more people are voting for Donald Trump in spite of his character and the things he does. There aren't too many people who say, hey, look, Donald Trump was just pretending, feigning masturbation there at a rally. Oh, well, let's vote for that guy. I don't really think that's a thing for too many people. That turns more people off than I think it's just you know what? I'm not crazy about what this guy does, but boy, it sure seems like he's making a better argument, because even though if you look at the economic argument, the U.S. is kind of the envy of the developed world and how we bounce back from COVID. I wish Democrats will at some point learn that you cannot argue people out of their feelings. And I think that is just such an important lesson to learn. And that the argument that Trump had is it's unfair that we have 12 million people in this country illegally that shouldn't be here. They should be gone. It's unfair that biological men can play in women's sports. That shouldn't be the case. It's unfair that things cost way more than they did when I was president. Those are the kind of messages that are emotional and that resonate, not the sort of word salad kind of carefully poll-tested, well-resourced, safe, boring, and losing message that the Harris campaign came up with. And so bad message, bad candidate, bad fundamentals. It's not too surprising to me. Ken, did I hear you in the background there?
That wasn't me. That was Trey.
Okay. I think you might have been groaning or something, but I don't know if you have any. Go ahead, Trey, if you have thoughts on that.
But that's the fundamental problem the Democrats are going to face moving forward. Okay, again, let's take a look at the data. What we know right now, 40% of exit poll voters are saying right now, and they agree with Trump, that we should deport immigrants. 40%. And I don't think there's a universe in which Democrats are going to change on that issue. Likewise, the other big potential issue, if we want to go away from structure and think about some of the issues, abortion. Another one of the issues. Of course, a lot of people like the idea of abortion, but it did not actually pull Harris's or any Democrats' numbers up, which suggests to me, we need more data. It suggests to me that Trump was right in coming out as being pro-choice. In other words, pro-choice is a position of a growing number of Republicans, but Republicans who are not willing to vote for Democrats on abortion. They want to vote for Republicans who are closer to them as Republicans.
Yeah. One thing we haven't talked about to this point are the polls. And for the third straight presidential election, they were off in a systematic manner, undercounting Trump's support again. Now, I just put together some very brief, the final numbers aren't in, but looking at the 7 battleground states, it looks like the average miss was around undercounting Trump by a little bit over 2%, which is around where it was, I think, in 2016. It was a little worse in 2020. So it seems to me that one thing we can draw away from that is maybe not so much Jon Stewart last night said something about he was just never going to trust him again. I think his phrase was, blow me to the pollsters. Not that that's terribly helpful, but I think that the fundamental problem is that it's really tough to estimate the votes of people who won't talk to you. And that, I don't think there's necessarily a good answer for it. At least it sure doesn't seem like there is. And Trey, I know you said that before the election that you were talking with some folks and that was your sense as well, right? That it's just almost impossible to get any kind of good read because the Trump folks are just not responding to pollsters. No,
I mean, I can't go into details, but I can say in general terms, here at the school, for my students, we work with 2 different firms that hand students out, and they struggle to get a hold of Trump voters and particular demographics. I will come out a little bit in favor of the polls and say that I hear your numbers. I was looking at it myself, and all of the numbers we're seeing so far are still inside the margin of error for most of the polls that we had coming up. I think one of the problems is that we keep looking at these micro beneath the confidence interval level of data. So like you say, they're 2%, but most polls have a 3.5 to 4% margin of error, meaning that the outcome that we're seeing is still population likely with the representatives, even if we assume that sample was in fact representative.
Trey, standing up for the establishment pollsters. I'm so disappointed in you, my friend. Come on, three elections in a row. Almost all the major polling and polling averages going in the wrong way. I wake up and smell the bacon or the coffee or whatever it is you need to wake up and smell, Trey, because this is just
they weren't outside of the margin of error.
I'm on Trey's side on this one, Michael.
Mayor,
are you going to help me out here? I'm being attacked I'm being attacked from the left and the right.
Ken, help me out here. You're pro math. Come on.
Yeah. I mean, also all the states that they said, would clearly go either to Trump or to Harris did go to Trump or to Harris exactly as predicted. There were no surprises except maybe if you count the one outlying poll on Iowa at the end that somehow said that, Iowa could go to Harris and then it didn't. But really, it was only the ones where they said it's going to be close and it could go either way. They happened to all break in favor of Trump, but really by very small amounts that were inside the margin of error.
It's like flipping a fair coin maybe 21 times, and 19 of those times it comes up head, and you say, well, these things happen. I think at that point, you say, it's time to look at the coin. May, you have any thoughts on this? I don't know if I'm going to take a side on this one.
Yeah, I imagine that polling is, obviously more and more difficult. It does seem to still not count Trump voters. And it's just shocking to me that people continue to pay millions of dollars for this type of information. So I don't, I'm not part of this industry. I don't really know what's to be done, but I do know now that going forward, everyone will just assume as they did. This is, I think, why I always thought the polls were good for Trump, even though they were showing ties, even though they were sometimes showing Harris advantages in some of the blue wall states. I always assumed Trump was going to win if it was just down to the polls, because you just know that Trump is running 3 points ish ahead of the polls like that.
Yeah.
That's just, I think, the way that people look at this and assume. So it all came down to turnout, sort of assuming that people do like Trump. Will they come out and vote? And that was always my concern. And you could see on social media that was a lot of people on the Trump side's concern, because the early vote was 55% female. And so the bros were not early voting. And it turns out the bros still really didn't vote at the same levels of women. Women are still outvoting men, and I think men declined a percentage point in turnout. So even with all this male messaging, still there was declined turnout across the board, but including with men. So that to me is, I no longer trust the polls. I always assume that Trump / MAGA Republicans are going to run higher than them. And I still have concerns with turnout with men.
Yeah. And
Mike, let me just
please
let me give you some numbers here. So I think more than 50 million people voted. So if 250,000 votes out of that, just in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, had gone the other way, then Harris would have won the election. So that's a super close election, right? It would have only taken 250,000 votes across 3 states out of more than 50 million votes in the country to turn the election. So I don't really see how the polls could have, gotten down more specific than that. And I'm looking right now in Wisconsin, it's less than 1% difference. In Pennsylvania, it's less than 1% difference. In Michigan, it's 1.5% difference. But those are very close margins.
Yeah, I think that's the sort of thinking that's going to keep the Democrats in the political wilderness for a lot longer than we need to be. That's exactly my fear, is that it's going to take a Reagan versus Mondale type of wipeout for us to wake up and smell the coffee, the bacon, the whatever it is, because it seems clear to me that the Democrats are shrinking their coalition. Republicans are growing their coalition. As long as we said, well, if we just had a slightly different circumstances, a little bit better candidate, a few votes here or there, that I think is just really, really defeating. That's going to defeat our. Go ahead. Sorry, I'm.
That's a different point than saying that the polls got it wrong.
He's bringing up here, right? So Ken is just suggesting the polling data. He's not suggesting that the Democrats should run home and say, the numbers might have turned out a different direction.
But he just said that. He just said 250,000 votes a different way.
I was defending the pollsters.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I was defending the pollsters. Yeah.
I wasn't clear which bad argument you were making, I guess was my problem, basically. But no, but again, I see your point. And Trey, I see your margin of error point. But when the polls are off regularly, that suggests a systematic problem with how polling
if you're within the margin of error and the answer is within the margin of error, then you're not off.
You're wrong.
Right.
No, you're both wrong. You're both very wrong. Because, again, it goes back to my coin flip analogy. If you're telling me if someone said to you, hey, this is a fair coin, let's bet on the outcome, and after 18 or 19 times it came up heads every one of those times, I don't think you'd say, well, those things happen. Well, I think you'd say, let me take a look at that coin.
Let me take that analogy. Yeah. Let's do this experiment. We have 50 people, and all 50 of them flip a coin, right? And then we say everybody who had a tails, you're going to sit down, right? And about half of them are going to sit down, approximately. Again, assuming we recognize those coins aren't going to be perfectly fair. Everybody's got a quarter. And so we say, okay, everybody's flip again. And they're all going to flip again. And another approximate half are going to sit up. And we're going to keep doing that. And there will eventually be a person who will have gotten heads some 10, 15 times in a row. And that doesn't mean that their coin was unfair. It just happened to mean that they had a circumstance in which non-linking probabilities over time wound up with a series of
Mike, more to the point, no poll said that Harris was going to win. No poll said that. They all said it was a toss-up, and a few of them said Trump was going to win.
Yeah, and again, I think you guys are missing my point. And my point is not about individual polls for this one election. My point is about looking at a number of these states over not one, not two, but three different elections. But again, I'm not going to, at this point, we're going to be talking past each other. I'm convinced you guys are wrong and I am right. And of course I am right, but I know enough to try to convince you out of your wrongness on this particular issue. Well, let me move on to something a little bit different than this. It occurs to me, and I made this argument actually last week or the week before, that even had Kamala Harris won, she would have been the first president in 30-something years to not come in with control of Congress, would have almost certainly been an ineffective president for at least that reason. And now, actually, we have a situation where it looks very likely that Republicans, or not very likely, but there's a good chance Republicans are going to have unified control. So they're going to own this sucker. And for at least 2 years, they're going to own this sucker. And maybe in the long run, that's what it takes. And hey, if Trumpism works, which I certainly don't think it will, and obviously Ken and Trey, you don't think it will, but we're going to have an opportunity to find out. And if it doesn't, then maybe we get someone in 2028 without the baggage of a Kamala Harris in a much better environment where we can actually put our vision into play as opposed to what we'll see from Donald Trump and Republicans for at least the next 2 and possibly the next 4 years, depending on how those congressional elections come out. So that's kind of my one way of looking at it in a positive way. May, any thoughts on that?
Good luck to you. I think
I love it.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be a decision for the Democrats, I think, because there's a couple of ways to look at this election. And one is that the American people, and I've just seen this a lot on Twitter, are racist and misogynistic, and some, like that there's a problem with the electorate. And then there's a way to look at it with, there's a problem with the party. And I was watching MSNBC this morning and they said the lowest percentage of people, since they've been tracking self-identified as Democrats, something like 32%. And it's never huge, it's never in the 50s, but it's higher 30s. And so they said they have a branding issue. And I think that that's actually what Joe Biden thought for maybe his entire presidency. But at the beginning, when his approval ratings started going down, and okay, well, why don't we try Bidenomics? Why don't we try all this different branding? That there is some sort of branding issue, and that there's obviously a problem with the electorate and their MAGA extremists. And I don't think that it's a branding issue. I do think that there is a policy issue. And of course, we're going to disagree because I'm Republican. So obviously I like Republican policies. But I think that if Democrats don't have an openness to that question, as Republicans, I think, did, Trump is an extremely moderate candidate to the point of leftism on some issues. So, and well, Trump's his own thing. So it's hard to even put him in the box of conservatism. But after Romney, I really thought Republicans can never win again because people don't like these policies. This just isn't what people want. He's a nice guy. He's a successful guy. It's not a branding thing. It's a policy thing. And then you get Trump. So I guess I will be interested to see whether Democrats say it's a problem with the electorate, it's a problem with the branding, or it's a problem with the policies.
Well, if it's a problem with the electorate, we're screwed because we can't swap them out for people we would like more. But I want to say I half agree with you. Because I don't agree that it's a policy thing so much, because I think if we're a policy thing, rational voters could take a look and say, my gosh, the U.S. economy is doing so much better than every other economy post-COVID and various other things. I think it's that Donald Trump didn't just capture one of our two major political parties. He's captured the national mood, at least for enough of the electorate to make for what I see as a convincing win. And it's because he's not a normal politician. He leads a movement. And we on the Democratic side, we don't have anyone. We don't have anything like that. He's not some focus group, poll tested, safe person. He's unpredictable. He's unquestionably uproariously himself. And regular people, as opposed to sort of political junkies who listen to these podcasts, regular people respond to that. And we've seen that. People like him in a way that it's so hard for people, I think, the Democratic elite especially, to get. But boy, it sure is obvious to me. And I'm sure, I don't know, Trey and Ken, you probably don't agree with that, but I'll throw it to you, your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, look, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, May, to a point. And but Mike, I think I disagree with you a little bit on your take there. I mean, here's a couple of things. One, Donald Trump is not a conservative, and the Republican Party is not a conservative party anymore. That is done. And we need to look more at the data, but I think what the populism of Trump suggests is that not only is conservatism not the ideology of the United States anymore, neither modern nor classical liberalism is the ideology of the United States anymore. And that's the space where Democrats live. And I think that's what's so difficult. So, when you talk about Trump being authentic himself, I think part of that authenticity is the fact that he has reshaped the Republican Party. The Republican Party is not a conservative party. There is nothing conservative about it today. But in the same vein, though, that's not, I think what he is doing has then tapped in, and that's where I think I agree with both of you a little bit here. He's tapped into that shift in the American population. We aren't any kind of liberals, and we're not conservatives. And that's a new dividing line. And then to your earlier question, Mike, and then May, you were getting at this a little bit too. I do think there are some policies that Trump is going to be able to deliver on. But I think what makes it hard is for those of us who live either in the classical or in the modern liberal space, or heck, even some of our hanger-on conservatives, is that I think he can, right? So I go back to the polls we talked about. Well, 60-some% of people want deportations. That's not going to be a hard necessarily thing to deliver. And boom, you've done it. Now, we might suggest that that's a bad thing. We might suggest that's an immoral thing. But that's still delivering on the promise. And so to your point, Mike, why can't voters take a look at the economic things of other countries? Nobody cares,
yeah.
Right? Nobody cares. The question is going to be, how am I compared to me, right? So if I am well off compared to the rest of the world, but I still can't purchase as much as I did 2 years ago, what do I care that my purchasing is better than what happens in the UK? And I think that's, again, part of that non-liberalism, non-conservatism view that, America first.
Yeah, Mike, let me respond. I heard a couple different, this is going to sound scattershot because I heard so many different things that all of you said. But first, it does look like the Republicans will have the House, but it also looks like they'll have an even smaller majority in the House than they have now. And so that's going to be very, very difficult for Mike Johnson. We saw how much difficulty he had operating the House, this past 2 years with the small majority and a number of rebels. And he might have a majority. It might be 218, 217. It might be 219, 216. It's not going to be bigger than that. So it's going to be a smaller majority probably than last time. And that does raise a lot of interesting, issues around governing. There were many times in the past 2 years where Johnson had to rely on Democratic votes just to keep the lights on. And that probably is going to be the dynamic again. So we'll watch for that. I agree with all you guys that Trump is going to take a lot of unilateral executive action and things are going to happen because he's the president. And then the public will decide whether they like those things or not. I'm fairly confident that he's going to do even worse in his first 2 years now than he did in his first 2 years after the 2016 election. And of course, the Democrats had huge victories in the 2018 midterms, and I'm sure they're going to have huge victories again in the 2026 midterms because of the backlash that will be awakened, by all the terrible things that Trump's about to do. And I really, on the sort of question of, I think, Mike, you had earlier said, if people feel like the economy is bad, you can't just argue them into thinking it's good. I don't know about that. I think the reverse is what actually did happen, right? That you said 40% of the people are telling pollsters that they think the economy is bad for them and that they're worse off than they were 4 years ago. I mean, that isn't reality, right? So 40% of the public, most of them have been persuaded by propaganda or by argument or something that they're worse off today than they were 4 years ago. So if people could be persuaded that they're worse off than they were 4 years ago, even when they're not, I'm not sure why people can't be persuaded that they're better off than they were 4 years ago.
Be careful on that, Ken. I mean, I'll talk about myself specifically, right? Even with my teeny little bits of raises, my purchasing power today is worse than it was 4 years ago.
Well,
right. That's not 40% of the public, though. That's
Well, obviously, I'm not a representative sample, but I'm just saying, be careful. I think you might be making the mistake of suggesting, because you haven't experienced it, that the 42% has to be wrong, that it's just a messaging issue.
No, it's a fact, too, though, that although inflation, there was a lot of inflation, but at the whole low end of the wage scale, wage gains were higher than inflation.
Well, I think in the end, but I think a larger point here is that it's always going to be easier to convince people in a negative direction than in a positive direction. And that's just because of how most people happen to be wired. So telling people, be afraid, be very afraid, things are bad, we're going off a cliff here up ahead, that's always easier than, sunny skies, that sort of thing. And I think that's why I'm not entirely disagreeing with you, Ken, but I think it's a lot bigger haul to convince people things are better than what they think than things are worse than what they think.
But now that the Republicans are in, it's the Democrats that get to convince them that it's worse than they think.
Exactly. So it's hard.
Welcome to structural factors, Ken. I appreciate you coming on my side.
So May, you're the only one of us who's actually worked with President Trump. And so I would say that you, more than any of us, would have more of an insight into, especially domestically, how he's likely to kind of do things. And of course, you've heard plenty of the stuff on the left about how this is the end of democracy as we know it, and there are going to be all these massive unilateral actions. What's your sense of what this, at least the first couple years of the Trump second term, when he is likely to have about as much support as he can get from the other institutions, what do you think that's going to look like, is your sense at this point?
So I think two big priorities. One, securing the border, and we did not pass either immigration generally or border security litigation more specifically during the 4 years. So I still think that there are administrative tools that can be used, the same ones from before, like Remain in Mexico, what we called metering, which I think actually the Biden administration is using metering right now, where you have to kind of wait in line at whatever at the not the polling place, the
border crossing
at the border. Yeah, but I think tightening up asylum regulations, ending the Haitian Venezuelan sort of CBP1 app thing. So all of these administrative, just putting in the Trump regs, ending the Biden ones, and then I would think proposing some sort of legislation probably to change asylum rules, because that really is the root of the problem. You can come here, claim asylum, you get a credible fear hearing if you say the magic words. I've been in these credible fear hearings. They're very easy to just be released into the country. So I would imagine asylum changes via law would be coming. Then I think the other piece is largely regulatory, which is an energy policy. So the Biden administration has done things like requiring all sorts of carbon calculations, NEPA, changes to NEPA, things to make it really difficult to get permits to build, making it difficult to move forward once you have those permits. All this story about, broadband internet, they spent $43 billion and didn't give it to anyone. Well, a lot of them is red tape, different hiring red tape that you have. So I think a lot of things to unleashing American energy, building, manufacturing, those types of things. I think a lot of that will be regulatory. So I see those two as the big 1-2 first. Undoing Biden's Title IX regulation, I see also as an easy one. I think there is a question there of whether you just undo the Biden one and put back the Trump one, or whether you go a step further. The Trump one was silent as to gender identity. It didn't say that sex does not mean gender identity. It just didn't define sex. I think now you might have something a little bit clearer on that says that you actually do have to provide women with single sex sports. You can provide co-ed, but there has to be a single sex option in order to have equivalent opportunities for women. So that'll probably, I think that'll be another focus.
Yeah. Yeah. Two other big things that I have my eye on in 2025. I would have mentioned those two things, I think, as well, not in the kind of detail as you can go into them in, but two big things are coming up in 2025, the expiration of the Trump tax cuts and also the expiration of the Affordable Care Act enhanced subsidies. Now, my sense is that there's going to be a lot of demand among Republicans to extend those Trump tax cuts and perhaps even increase them, and not to extend those ACA subsidies. Now, my hope is that my hope against hope is that there's maybe some deal to be made, that Ken's right, that there are enough Democrats that are needed, we can have a deal to maybe extend both of those things. Though my sense is that the tax cuts will be extended, the ACA subsidies won't be extended. And I was actually fairly disappointed that Vice President Harris talked, it seemed to me, so little about health care and the Affordable Care Act and what's likely, I think, to happen with that. I don't think Trump and the Republicans are going to end the Affordable Care Act, but I do think they're going to put a lot more restrictions in place and cut down on those subsidies. Anyone have any thoughts on those two things?
I think you'll undoubtedly mess, at least with the Affordable Health Care Act, around the edges, right? So we have kind of weird brokers like Remodel Health and others who now can effectively profit by allowing businesses to not provide health care and then put those individuals on the ACA. So that's going to create an interesting situation in red states like Oklahoma, where there are more of us than ever on ACA because our employers don't have to provide health insurance. So, will that be leverage, or does that end up becoming a way to cut more? I don't know. That's a hard one to see around.
I will say that if anybody wants to know who I think will be listened to and who the leaders will be in healthcare reform for 2025, I would visit Paragon Health Institute. These are all former Trump health officials, also just like policy wonks from the Hill, from wherever, and at the top of the website, healthcare agenda in the next term. So who knows if that'll actually be followed through on, but these are the people who do work on it.
The other thing I wanted to bring up is World's richest man looks to be the regulatory czar in a Trump administration. What could possibly go wrong with that sort of thing? But I think Trump certainly owes at least a little bit, more than a little bit, to Elon Musk and his turnout operation. That PAC that Musk largely funded certainly helped. I don't know if it was all that necessary, but I'm a little uncomfortable about that kind of marriage of big business and big government. Is it just me? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I think he should lose his security clearance. He's been, communicating with Putin about, use of technology that he makes against U.S. national security interests. That's not going to happen, but it should happen.
Trey?
Look.
That was a disgusted, I don't know, just disappointed
well, listen,
sigh.
I'm going to be honest today. I mean, the bottom line for me is I'm disappointed overall, because my hope, and again, I predicted a Trump victory, but my hope was that we'd have a chance for a Republican Party that would once again be conservative and classically liberal. And I've just got to grieve that, Mike. I've just got to grieve that, and I'll get there. It's okay. Yeah. But I think Musk, he is a great example of the fact that this is, again, be a different kind of ideological era for the Republican Party and for what's in charge. And so, again, I hear what you're saying, but that is just, nobody cares. I don't mean me. I'm not, but nobody cares. And it's not a win and go. Individuals like Musk have long been popular, and he's going to continue to be popular. And the only real downside between Trump and Musk is if they end up having some kind of ego fight over something. That could be a problem. We've seen that happen before. But outside of that, we're gonna see RFK Jr. We're gonna see Musk, and it's a new era for populist policies.
Yeah. May, any thoughts on Musk? Go ahead.
I mean, I'm not. I guess I just have a realist perspective on this, which is Elon Musk has to choose whether he is in the government or outside the government. And if you're in the government, then you have to impoverish yourself. It is very difficult to own single stocks. And even if you can own them, then you can't work on any policies that surround that. So that makes a lot of people not want to work in the government that have single stocks. You can have mutual funds, these sorts of things. And so I don't see Elon Musk going in as an employee. I just don't. And so the question is, will he be an advisor on the outside? That's also legal, but it is governed through the FACA process, the Federal Advisory Committee Act. And that process is very expensive, very cumbersome, but it also requires pure public access to meetings, public access to minutes. And FACAs are very popular. People do them all the time. We had them in the Trump White House. Biden has them. Everybody has them. But they're disfavored by everybody because they suck. And so, but outside businessmen like to participate. So I don't see the FACAs as being very useful because everything has to be public and it's just a total pain and nobody likes them. So I think on a practical basis, everybody thinks, oh my gosh, Elon Musk is going to go change the government. No, he's not. No, he's not. Neither of those two options is actually very feasible. So no, he's not. No. But that's just my sense.
No. I think one thing, certainly at this point, the Democrats are going to have to pivot from the end of democracy, existential threat as we know it. Well, either that happens, in which case we're in way more trouble than any of us want us to be in, or that message has basically lost any little resonance that it ever actually had. And I always thought it was kind of an overstatement. But before we go, because I should point out to listeners that a couple days from now, Trey and Ken are going to be doing a deeper dive and they have more information. Trey, you can grieve out on anything you want. You can too. But we just wanted to do this right after the election or as soon as we could after to give initial impressions. But we will be doing a regular show on Friday. Trey and Ken will be recording that. Just want to let folks know. But before we do close, a couple things I wanted to ask everyone. Number one, do you think that if there is, in fact, unified Republican control, that Trump will put enough pressure on Senate Republicans to end the filibuster? And secondly, do you think there will be one or possibly two Supreme Court retirements? I'm looking at you, Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito, the two oldest justices, thereby kind of pushing out that conservative majority on the court for quite a few more years. And I will start with you, Trey, on both of those.
I think Alito might. I don't think Thomas steps down. I think he stays until the end of time, or his time. In that sense, I don't mean in a bad way.
Sure.
His lifespan. And, in terms of ending the filibuster, no, I don't think that happens, because I think most of the major policies can either happen in reconciliation or they are going to happen in executive functions, some kinds of executive orders. There's other kinds of devices for that. So no, I don't think we see the end of the filibuster. I do think we see one justice step down, probably near to the end of the Trump term, Alito, but I don't think Thomas steps down.
Okay, next up to you, Ken.
Yeah, on the Supreme Court, I actually do think that they'll both step down. I take Trey's point about Justice Thomas's egoism, but I actually think, he witnessed Ruth Bader Ginsburg hang on too long and cost the Democrats a seat. I think he's more strategic than that. And so I think they'll both step down. I think they'll both step down effective upon the confirmation of their successors. So if there's problems confirming their successors, then they won't step down. As for the filibuster, I agree with Trey completely that the Republicans will not get rid of it. I think there's a lot of reasons they won't want to get rid of it. One, because their majority in the House will be so thin, I don't think they'll be able to move things through the House very much without at least a few Democratic votes. So they don't really have a benefit of, being able to do a party line vote in the Senate if they're not going to be able to do that in the House. And the other thing is, I think the filibuster generally serves Republicans more than it serves Democrats in most situations. So Republicans will be more loath to get rid of it, because usually Republicans want more inaction out of the Congress and Democrats want more action. And the filibuster has a skew in favor of inaction. And finally, I think, especially in a Trump administration, the Republican senators are not always going to actually want to do what Trump wants. And letting the Democrats filibuster them is going to be the most politic way that they can do that. So I think there's a lot of reasons they won't get rid of the filibuster.
Okay. And May actually had to leave for something else, and I will close this out with my answer to those questions. I think at least one and possibly two Supreme Court retirements, and I'm not sure if it's going to be Alito and or Thomas. And I think at least there's going to be a real effort to repeal the filibuster, to end the filibuster. It has to be repealed. It's not a law. It's just a Senate rule. And I think Trump is going to put a lot of pressure into that in the first year or so, and it's going to come real close. If it's going to happen, I don't know. But I think if Republicans end up with, say, a majority in the Senate of 54, which is within the realm of possibility at this time, I think they might just end up doing it. Because I take your point, Ken, about how Republicans traditionally want less out of government. I think that's changed. That goes back to Trey's point. I don't think the Republican Party is anything resembling a conservative party now. They're a right-wing revolutionary party. They want to get big stuff done. They want to get it done quickly. I think Trump wants that. I think he's going to put enormous pressure on. And I've seen nothing resembling backbone from enough Republicans to stop him, especially now. So I'm gonna predict that there are 54 Republicans in the Senate that we're going to see the end of the filibuster. And on that, I hope I'm wrong on that. But on that note of I hope I'm wrong, we will end. And I just want to, May had to leave us, but I thank her and I thank you guys for joining me on this special episode. And again, listeners get an extra dose of Trey and Ken in a little more than 48 hours from now when they'll be recording. And we'll get that up Friday night or Saturday morning, depending on how quickly post-production goes. But I would say no matter whether you're thrilled or just devastated by this election, we got to do our best to try to work together. And I think I'm feeling kind of down. I'm trying really hard not to let that negativity get to me too much and try to find whatever good I can in the incoming administration and try to honestly support what I think they're doing right and oppose in a decent and honorable way without resorting to the sort of ugliness and name calling that I find so reprehensible, the stuff that I disagree with. And I am sure that over the course of the next 4 years, I will find plenty to disagree with. So on that note, I will say thanks again. And again, if you are listening to this point, we really do appreciate your support. And we're not going anywhere for the next 4 years, just like Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, I guess. And we can really use your support. We're going to be living in some very interesting times. I think all three of us who are still here now will agree that Trump 2.0 is going to be something to see, and we can use all the support we can get in trying to talk about it in a rational, civil, bipartisan way. So if you can't support us, we really would appreciate it. We always put those support links in the show notes. And like I said, if you can help us out, that would be great. And if you can't, we understand that as well. But if you could just like us, rate and review us on whatever podcast app you're using, that helps as well. And if you would like to get our full midweek show and you're not able to be a supporter, just send me an email on mike@politicsguys.com and I will get that set up for you. And finally, before we go, as always, a very special thanks to our executive producers. They are Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, and Don Oglesby. And Tran Ken will be back before you can hardly even know it with a new episode. We hope you'll join us.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,